All right, let's get going. Thank you all for being here today for our first 30 by 30 virtual Expo event. A few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. And if you have questions today, we'd like you to submit them through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The chat is open for you to talk to each other and to also identify any technical issues, but we'll be using the Q&A for questions. I won't necessarily be monitoring the chat closely. So good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Norris, and I am the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat at the California Natural Resources Agency. I lead our 30 by 30 initiative on behalf of the state, and I'm really excited to be part of the 30 by 30 partnership with all of you. For those of you joining us for the first time, 30 by 30 is an international movement focused on conserving 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And here in California, we've committed to this goal. In April of last year, we released our Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy. And that strategy contains a lot of information about how we want to advance this initiative, what it means to be a 30 by 30 conservation area, and how important habitat throughout California is for making this successful. So for more information about 30 by 30, I encourage you to check out that document or watch the plenary session from our 30 by 30 kickoff event. Links to the document and that event are being put into the chat right now. Today's event is not to focus on 30 by 30, but to do a deeper dive with one of our partners. So the 30 by 30 partnership is really a movement focused on reaching the 30 by 30 goal by working together, learning from each other, and supporting each other. So I mentioned this kickoff event. On September 28th, we hosted an event to kick off this partnership at the California Natural Resources Agency. And as part of this event, we had sort of an overview plenary in the morning, which I mentioned we've shared the link to. And then we had in the afternoon a community expo where we offered opportunities to make connections with over 20 agency partners, funders, and technical assistance providers. The idea really is that conservation in California is locally driven, and we're trying to provide the resources to make that happen. The event was actually filled to capacity, which surprised all of us. And we know that not everyone was able to join us in person. So we're hosting this virtual expo series to try to bring that experience to everyone throughout the state who couldn't be there with us. We're here to keep building the momentum and the connections we made that day by learning from each other and hoping to continue to grow this partnership that we'll need to achieve 30 by 30. So today, I'm very excited to be joined by my colleague and friend, Virginia Jameson from the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Virginia is going to tell us a little bit about programs and fundings and other resources that help advance 30 by 30. And then we'll have time for Q&A with all of you. Before I turn it over to Virginia, I might some of you might be wondering, why food and agriculture? What does it have to do with our conservation areas? But we make a special point of this in our document. So I'm actually excited to start with this as our first virtual expo conversation. Because 30 by 30 conservation areas, while they have an elevated level of conservation, they're focused primarily on protecting intact ecosystems and biodiversity and they're durable, and the definitions being put into the chat. We recognize that those conservation areas exist in a larger matrix, right? So what we do on the lands that are not technically 30 by 30 conservation areas affects our ability to protect biodiversity throughout the state. And the California Department of Food and Agriculture is really thinking hard about how to protect our biodiversity in working lands. And so I'm excited to have Virginia here to talk about how we can work together to protect biodiversity across the state. And of course, make sure that we continue to be the breadbasket of the world. So Virginia, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
You would think I'd remember to unmute myself after all this time.
It's all right.
But anyway, no, thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate this. This is an area near and dear to my heart. I've worked on farmland conservation for basically my whole career and have always felt that not only is it an important part of the way we plan our communities and do things like reduce vehicle miles traveled and prevent sprawl and ensure a fresh, nutritious food supply, but it also provides open space and connectivity for wildlife, for a buffer zone against wildfire between communities and forests. So
Hey,
there's
Virginia,
just all of
I
these
hate to
benefits.
interrupt you, but you sound a little bit like you're underwater. I don't know if your microphone's got water on it. No. Maybe I'm the only one. Anyway, keep talking. I'll let you know if we can't hear you. Just
How
warning
about
you.
now?
Perfect. Keep going.
Okay. I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, so given that my experience is a little bit broader landscape-wise than just my work most recently at CDFA, I thought I would start with some background information on other conservation programs that exist in California and some that are particularly locally relevant. And I think the best place to start is with the Williamson Act. And a lot of you are probably really familiar with this. I saw in the chat a lot of people joining from the different land trusts, including some of the agricultural land trusts. I saw my alma mater, the American Farmland Trust, represented here, so they'll know all about this. But essentially, California is really lucky because we've got a conservation tool that I think is the envy of other states. And that is the Williamson Act, also known as the California Land Conservation Act of 1965. And this is a program set in statute that enables farmers and ranchers at the local level to forego paying property taxes as long as they sign a contract to keep their properties in conservation for at least 10 years. And then that contract renews every year. As long as they don't, state that they are disenrolling, then they're able to continue this. This is a program that's primarily relied upon by the ranching community. And it's been a little bit hard for the state to track exactly how many acres are enrolled because we haven't had a system yet that all counties can contribute to. But last count, I think it was something like 14 million acres were enrolled, was the best estimate, and it's been as high as 16 million. So that's just something that no other state has, and we're really fortunate that we have a way that we can incentivize farmers and ranchers to keep their land in open space, continue to be doing some of these heritage agricultural activities, and also make room for our species. There are a lot of connections between ranching and carrying out activities like weed suppression, reducing risk of fire, things like that, there's these co-benefits, we would call them, to continuing to have land in ranching in particular. So I see a question in the chat about how compliance is monitored. So this happens at the local level. So counties would be reporting or gathering information about who is still farming or ranching, and that's really what's important to them, is like, are you continuing to farm or ranch, and therefore can keep on being enrolled in the program. So yeah, that's a really cool one, and one that I hope we continue. The next one I'd like to talk about is the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. And this is one that I had the privilege of managing for the past 4 years while I was a program manager at the Department of Conservation. And this is a program that is based at the Strategic Growth Council and then administered by the Department of Conservation. And it provides kind of like multi-fold purpose, all of which is around farmland conservation, but the program offers payments for conservation easements on agricultural lands, and also planning grants to local governments so that they can make plans for how they want to move forward with conserving their farms and ranches. The SALT program, again, like another place where California is really the envy of the United States and the world. The SALT program has a continuous appropriation from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So it receives 2% of that fund, which is a significant conservation investment relative to what happens elsewhere in the world. You know, they're funding so many projects lately, it's a little bit hard to keep track. But I think the investment so far has been around $230 million. And we've protected, you know, gosh, nearing a couple 100,000 acres of farmland in the past. I think that program was set up in 2014. So past 7-8 years, we've protected a lot of land. You compare that to what we were able to do under the prior program, which was the California Farmland Conservancy Program, which was very bond funded and relied on, you know, like single spates of bond funding. And that program, with kind of the more inconsistent funding, funded only about 59,000 acres of conservation in the prior 20 years. So with the advent of cap and trade, increased focus on protecting agricultural lands and reducing sprawl, we've just really ramped up the conservation of agricultural land in this state, you know, in the past 7 to 10 years, in a way that's pretty unprecedented and awesome. And I'm going to take a look at the chat.
Well, let's. So I'm going to ask just a general question. So, how does the SALT program work? How do people get involved? I take it you mean that conservation mostly means avoiding development, right? Primarily. So,
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the process for applying to those?
Yeah, sure. Super good question. So this is where the land trust partners really come in to play. I mentioned earlier, we've got some of those on the line here. And there are land trusts in the state that are focused to, you know, to some degree or another, either like completely focused on the conservation of agricultural land to like it is within their mission, though it may not be their primary focus. So a landowner would want to work with one of these land trusts, and then the land trusts are the eligible applicants for the program and can submit an application. And that's so far been a yearly process where applications are due to the state in the spring and then funded in late August, and then the process starts kind of all over again. They have varying degrees of protection, specifically towards biodiversity and habitat. So in some cases, it's like, okay, we've identified there's a certain biodiversity resource on this land. We're going to like make sure we protect it. In some cases, it's more broad. So yeah, that's
and it's permanent. Those protections are permanent.
Yeah. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are permanent conservation easements. I mentioned that there's also a planning grant portion of funding that's in the program, and that's where local governments can get involved and do some of their local planning. There's now a capacity building element to the program so that land trusts can apply for the program for some help building up their capability within their organization, because we know that we need boots on the ground, as a hackneyed phrase, to get this work done, and the program is trying to support those efforts too. So yeah,
Great.
Those are the landscape scale things that the state is doing around agricultural land. We've also got a whole bunch of on-farm type practices. So that we incentivize. So at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, where I've now been working since December, and learning a lot here, we've got specifically a pollinator habitat program that's new. We have an open solicitation for that right now, and that closes in late November. But that one will fund the actual installation of things on agricultural lands like hedgerows, windrows, cover crops, things like that that really support pollinator biodiversity.
That's great.
Yeah, keeping that on our land. We also have a healthy soils program that funds some of those things, and then also some other conservation practices. There's a whole list of them actually, so I won't recite the list, but I think it's 27 practices that are emulate those created by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and that includes everything from cover cropping, composting, low till, no till, practices that we would classify as kind of climate smart agriculture, things that build soil carbon, sequester carbon, build soil organic matter, if I didn't already say that. And those things have a lot of co-benefits in and of themselves. So both for below ground soil biodiversity, but also for the retention of water and moisture in the soil. And the reduction of dust, which improves air quality. So all kinds of benefits there.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you got like $100 million in the budget for healthy soils. What was it? It's it's large amount.
Yeah, it's $85 million this year, and so like of course that's going to be a challenge to get out into the world, but we're working on it. So I think you'll be able to look for a solicitation for that program in the spring.
I think that's really exciting. I think that's really important. That's a good. I hope we get a lot of people that want to do it, right?
Yeah. I trust that we will. So far, the program has been consistently oversubscribed. It's another one that's grown rapidly. I think the first round of Healthy Soils was also in 2014. When Cap and Trade was first starting to fund a lot of these things, they started at the same time. So Healthy Soils, I believe, started off with something like a $5 million appropriation. It didn't get funded every year, but for the past few years, it's gotten funded more and more. And every single time we see more applications than we have funding, which is, it's a challenge and it's a good problem to have. And I'm just so grateful to see the interest. So
awesome. Great. Yeah. Are those all your programs? Because I have questions about each of them if you want.
Well, there's one more that I wanted to talk about, and that is our Conservation Agricultural Planning Grants Program, which we call CAP-GAP for short. And CAP-GAP just closed this last weekend, so we're not accepting any more applications. We do have, I believe, another year of funding for that one, so people will have another opportunity. But that one funds plans for on-farm and on-ranch practices. So that could include carbon farm plans, nutrient management plans. I think there's also a pollinator habitat plan there. So it's a variety of things that people can be, investing in their future of their ranch or farm and how they want to carry out conservation activities going forward. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. We have lots of other things at CDFA too, but those are the ones that I've kind of become most familiar with lately.
I think those are really exciting. And as I said at the top, what's adjacent to your really highly protected area really matters, right? So having more pollinators, having healthier soils, that's all great. And then of course, anytime we're improving our ability to sequester carbon, that's a great thing. So I'm looking at some questions in the Q&A. A question here is what are the limitations on recreation, if any, on lands participating in SALC? Does it vary by easement, local government, other?
I think that it varies by both, what the landowner is interested in. And I believe, the landowners will have to go through an appraisal process. The way the value of a conservation easement is determined is an appraiser comes out and looks at the value of the property without the easement, so at its full development potential. And then they look at the value without the easement, with the easement and the inability to develop. And then that that delta between those two numbers is the value of the conservation easement, and that's what SALC or other easement programs would fund.
Got it.
So decisions that you make within your easement, like how many building envelopes do you want to include? Do you want to allow recreational activities? Those are the kinds of decisions that will affect the property value going forward and therefore affect the easement value. Sorry, I got to keep drinking water here. But yeah, so I don't know whether, since I've left, the program has developed any specifics around recreation. I think in the past we allowed folks to kind of like bring their friends out to do camping or whatever they wanted to do, but it was not supposed to be open to public use.
Got it. Another question, and I don't know the answer to this, is there a publicly available database and spatial layers of where agricultural easements or enhancements are on the landscape?
There is, and I think it's within the Natural Resources Agency.
Department of Conservation.
Or
maybe
even the agency more broadly. I think it's just your general conservation easement database includes those ones, because of course
good point.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that actually gives me a chance to just talk about our system.
Please.
Right. So it's hidden in there. That's a really good point. Right. So the conserved areas database, which is now available on our our California Nature website. So the conserved area database has four categories. Has both all the areas that are sort of owned by the government, whether or not they count towards our 30 by 30. So GAP 1, 2, 3, and 4, whereas 1 and 2 are the most protective, and those apply to our 30 by 30 count. But some of these properties that you're talking about could be in the sort of GAP 3 working lands, but easements are also identified. So that was a convoluted answer, but the truth is, you're right. It is available on our website, and in some place you could check it out. Also, just another resource is the Green Info Network, which is the sort of organization that collects all this information for California, which has the protected areas database and the easements database. Might be more easily searched than ours, I'm not sure. Let's see if there's any other questions in the Q&A with the few minutes that we have left. One that I know you and I have talked about, someone asked, are we still losing ag lands to urban development every year?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, this continues to be a big problem. Estimates range from anywhere between 40,000 to 50,000 acres per year. Historically, that has been mostly caused by urbanization and sprawl development, but in more recent years, we're actually seeing more solar development. You know, I think in some cases where there's limited water supply, maybe that new land use makes sense. But yeah, in general, I would say that, you know, it continues to be kind of a bleeding wound of loss of agricultural land. And by the way, that's not just California. This is a problem nationally. Again, we have people from American Farmland Trust on the line here, where I can't remember what their stats were either, but it was like something like an acre a minute is lost nationally. So yeah, you know, it's a real thing, and we're trying to address it through all of these different mechanisms, but it continues to be a problem. And so of course that will then impact 30 by 30 conservation areas eventually as well, like as development encroaches.
Right. They can provide a buffer for 30 by 30 areas as well. That's exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So another question is about how CDFA is working with resource conservation districts. Do you provide technical assistance to landowners and farmers? Are you working through the RCDs? How does that all work? What's your relationship?
So we do provide funding to RCDs and other technical assistance providers to work directly with landowners, specifically on the Healthy Soils program and on our water conservation program, SWEEP, the State Water Efficiency Enhancement Program. And so we have a technical assistance requirement in statute. It's AB 2377, where the department needs to provide 5% of every appropriation of these program funds. And sorry, this is like very in the weeds, but anyway.
That's what they get if they came to your table at the expo. So go for it.
So 5% of those funds go towards technical assistance. And so we contract with our CDs to do that work and help farmers do anything from actually apply to the program to implement those practices on their farm or ranch.
So it sounds like land trusts and RCDs are really sort of part of your army to connect with the landowners that are looking for these opportunities.
Well,
Is
you know,
accurate?
Almost. AB 2377 specifies that RCDs are able to play that role. It does not include land trusts.
Oh.
But land trusts, on the other hand, are completely vital for the conservation programs that I talked about, the California, the SALC program, Sustainable Ag Lands Conservation Program, and then one that I briefly mentioned, the California Farmland Conservancy Program. Like those, we could not do that work without those partners.
Great. Well, I'm just really happy that we have such an incredible group of partners in 30 by 30. I'm going to bring up the couple of last slides so everyone has your contact information, and show you a list of other talks we're going to be having as part of our series. So here is information on how to connect with CDFA and where you can find more about these programs that Virginia talked about, as well as californianature.ca.gov. I mentioned the protected areas database that is linked here. And then before we close, we hope you'll check in, visit other tables, and the next slide has a list of what's to come. So please check it out. Thursday, we're going to talk to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and the Wildlife Conservation Board about how they're helping us advance 30 by 30. And then we have a bunch of other webinars going on every Tuesday and Thursday for the next several weeks. We hope you join us. And thank you for being part of the partnership. And thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.